friends, it's time for reading today, and we're on chapter 5 of Frindle. I'm so excited, guys. I love this book, and I love reading books to you guys. I'm so pumped. So today, I just want to remind you, we're constantly working on skills as we read. Yesterday, we talked about point of view, whether it's first person or third person. Does anybody remember what what the point of view was in Frindle? I hope you said third person. The narrator is not part of the story. So pretend this is the story. The narrator is out here and it is talking about what is going on in the story. So they're using words like he, she, they, him, her, all of those things. We've also been working on this anchor chart. We haven't quite finished it. But we have exposition, which remember your exposition is your characters and your setting. And we put the main characters in the setting. We have the rising action. These are the events that lead up to, and I'm going to go ahead and label it so that you can have it in your brain in case it happens during this chapter. This is called the climax. And then we will have the falling action. Those are the events that lead, and I left some space so that I could label or add some things there. But those are the events that lead to, and I'm going to write the resolution down here because this part right here is the resolution. So we've been kind of labeling our plot chart based off the stuff that we've learned in Frindle. And we're only on chapter 5, so we've kind of only got our exposition and our rising action there. Today, one more, sorry. So we've been doing this characters anchor chart, and I told you I was going to change it. Well, I did. Because as I started reading, I noticed that all of these characters that we have listed were minor characters. They were mentioned once and they moved on. Well, our two main characters are Nick Allen and Miss Granger. I'm also going to put Nick's parents down here because they were in there. But they didn't really say much about these people. But I want to continue to add character traits, either internal or external, to Nick Allen and Mrs. Granger, because those are our two main characters. So I'm going to keep that list going. Today, we're going to start a new list, and it is themes in Frindle. Does anybody remember what a theme is? Remember, the theme is the lesson or the message in a story. And almost every fiction story has some sort of lesson or message that they want you to notice in the story. Now, I'm hoping today that after we read chapter 5, we will kind of notice and be able to add some stuff to all of these anchor charts. I want to be able to add some themes in Frindle. What is he learning as he's going? What is he learning? Are we seeing any character change in him? Is he beginning to change, or maybe not yet? So let's go ahead and start reading chapter 5. So real quick, let's talk about let's do a 5-finger retell just real quick of Frindle so far, just real quick before we start. Okay, so remember, a 5-finger retell, that's where we tell our characters, our setting, the problem, some events in the story, and the solution. Now, we're not going to be able to do the whole entire 5-finger retell today because we haven't read the whole book. But let's go ahead and start talking about it. So our main characters are who? Well, we have Nick Allen and Mrs. Granger, according to our character anchor chart. We have Nick Allen and Mrs. Granger. Our setting is at the school. We wrote that down on our plot chart in our exposition. Our setting is at the school, sometimes at his house. Our problem, right now, his problem, if we go back and look, is that he has a teacher that gave him, remember guys, he gave him homework. He was trying to stall the class and be clever and ask questions, but actually he got himself a big whopping pound of homework. That's his problem right now. And some events that happened, well, he went from 3rd grade to 4th grade. Now he's in 5th grade, and he has to do a report over dictionaries and why we have words. But we don't really have a solution right now other than the fact that he's working on actually doing the book report, because that's kind of what's happening. So that was a short little 5-finger retell over Frindle so far. But let's go ahead and read chapter 5. I'm sure we're going to be able to add some things once we finish chapter 5. And you're also going to answer some questions over chapter 5. So as I read it, please make sure you are paying attention. All right. By lunchtime the next day, Nick had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. 7th period was coming. He was going to have to stand up in front of Mrs. Granger's class. The eyes of everyone in the class would be glued to his face. And Mrs. Granger's eyes would be cranked up to the maximum punch power. He looked over his notes again and again. The first English dictionary, the growth of the English language, William Shakespeare, words from French and German, new words, old words, new inventions, Anglo-Saxon words, Latin and Greek roots, American English. It all became a big jumble in his mind. And his grand plan from the night before, in the harsh fluorescent light of the school day, it seemed impossible. What is it with the clocks in this school? When you're planning to go to the carnival after school, the clocks in every class practically run backwards, and the school day lasts for about 3 weeks. But you have to go to the barber or go shopping for clothes after school, zip, the whole day is over before you can blink. And today, after lunch, periods 5 and 6 went by in 2 ticks. As the 7th period bell rang, Mrs. Granger walked into the classroom, took 4 steps to her desk at the side of the room, flipped open her attendance book, glanced out at the class, and made 2 little check marks. Then, looking up at Nick, she said, "I think we have a little report to begin our class today. Nicholas?" 15 seconds into 7th period, and Nick was on stage. This lady plays for keeps, thought Nick. He gulped, grabbed his crumpled note cards in his book bag, and walked to the front of the room. He stood next to the giant dictionary on its little table, and Mrs. Granger walked to the back of the classroom and sat primly on a tall stool next to the bookcases. She was wearing her blue uniform. Taking a deep breath, Nick began. "Well, the first thing I learned is that the first English dictionary—" Mrs. Granger interrupted. "Excuse me, Nicholas, but does your report have a title?" Nick looked blankly at her. "A title? No, I didn't make a title. Can you please remember to include a title whenever you prepare an oral or written report? Now please go on, Nicholas." And she smiled and nodded at him. Nick began again, looking right at Mrs. Granger. He said, "The dictionary." A couple of kids thought that was funny, but Nick played it straight and just kept talking. A lot of people think that the first English dictionary is put together in the 1700s by a man named Samuel Johnson. He lived in London, England. He was real smart and he wrote a lot of books, and he wanted all the other smart people to have a good dictionary to use, so he made one. But there were other dictionaries before his. The thing that was different about Johnson's dictionary was its size, first of all. He had over 43,000 words in it. The class made a bunch of noise at this big number, ooh and wow and stuff like that. And Nick lost his concentration. He glanced up at Mrs. Granger, expecting to see those eyes drilling a hole in him. But they weren't. They were almost friendly in a teachery kind of way. She shushed the class and said, "Go on, Nicholas. That's a fine beginning." Nick almost smiled, but he saw all the kids staring at him, so he gripped his note cards even tighter and jumped back in. The other thing that Samuel Johnson did was to choose the words he thought were most important, and then give lots of examples showing how the words got used by people. For example, he showed how the word take could be used in 113 different ways. Nick's report went on smoothly for 12 minutes. Nick was surprised at how easy it was to stand there and talk about this stuff. At the end of the first 5 minutes, Mrs. Granger had to stop Nick again to say, "Class, it is not good manners to yawn out loud or put your head down on your desk when someone is giving an oral report." No one in the class cared one little bit about the report except Mrs. Granger. Every time Nick glanced up, she was smiling, and her eyes were not the least bit icy or sharp. She was eating this stuff up, listening and nodding, and every once in a while she would say, "Ooh, very good point," and, "Oh, yes, that's exactly right." But the next time Nick looked up, he saw Mrs. Granger sneaking a look at her watch. 18 minutes gone. Maybe his idea was going to work after all. Time for phase 2. Okay, let's stop real quick. What I was expecting from Nick some themes. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but I was expecting Mrs. Granger was wanting to teach Nick a lesson, right? By assigning him this oral report, like don't waste my time or something like that, something very teachery. I was thinking he was going to learn that lesson, that you should not interrupt. You should not waste the teacher's time. But it seems like Nick has other plans. So let's see if the theme I'm thinking is correct. I'm thinking be respectful was something that Mrs. Granger was wanting to instill in Nick and make him believe, but it doesn't look like Nick is listening. It looks like he's not really going to follow that lesson. So let's keep reading. Reaching into his book bag, Nick pulled out the red dictionary he had brought from home. The one most of the kids had, the one Mrs. Granger said they should use. Nick said, "This is the dictionary that I use at home for my vocabulary work, and I opened it up last night to the very front, and right there I found a lot about how the dictionary was made, right in this book. So I thought some of the ideas would be good as part of my report. It says, Nicholas?" Nick looked up. Mrs. Granger got off her tall stool, and its wooden legs made a screech on the linoleum. Had snapped to attention, and the class was alert again. Mrs. Granger smiled, raised her eyebrows, and pointed at her watch. "Nicholas, I think the class should read that at home themselves. Now." John's hand was up in the air, and at Mrs. Granger's nod, he said, "But I don't have the dictionary at home, Mrs. Granger. I have the blue one." And several other kids immediately said, "Me too." Mrs. Granger tried not to show that she was annoyed. "Very well, Nick, but it shouldn't take too long. We have other things to do today." Nick kept his eyes open wide and nodded, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and began to read. Without question, this modern American dictionary is one of the most surprisingly complex and profound documents ever to be created, for it embodies unparalleled etymological detail, reflecting not only superb lexicographic scholarship, but also the dreams and speech and imaginative talents of millions of people over thousands of years. For every person who has ever spoke or written in English has had a hand in its making. It was a long article, and the kids were bored to death, but no one looked bored at all. Every kid in the room knew now that the period was more than half over, and that Nick's report wasn't just a report. It was one of the greatest time wasters he had ever invented. Mrs. Granger knew it too. She had edged around from the back of the room to the side near the windows. Nick glanced up at her now, and then as he read, and each time, Mrs. Granger's eyes clicked up to a new power level. After 8 minutes of Nick's best nonstop reading, her eyes were practically burning holes in the chalkboard behind him. There were only 10 minutes left in 7th period. When he took a breath to start a new paragraph, Mrs. Granger cut him off. "That's a fine place to stop, Nicholas. Class, let's all give him a round of applause for his report." The applause didn't last long. As Nick took his book bag and notes and sat down, Mrs. Granger's eyes went back to almost normal, and she actually smiled at him. "Although your report was a little long," she paused to let that sink in, It was quite a good one. And isn't it fascinating that English has more different words than any other language used anywhere in the world?" She pointed at her large dictionary. "That one book contains the definitions of more than 450,000 words. Now, wasn't I right, Nicholas? All this will mean so much more since you learned about it on your own." Mrs. Granger was beaming at him. Remember, Mrs. Granger was beaming at him. That means she was smiling. She was proud of him. Nick sank lower in his chair. This was worse than writing the report, worse than standing up to give it. He was being treated like the teacher's pet, and he had the feeling she was doing it on purpose. His reputation was in great danger, so he launched another question. He raised his hand, and he didn't even wait for Mrs. Granger to call on him. "Yeah, but I still don't really get the idea of why words all mean different things. Like, who says that DOG means the thing that goes woof and wags its tail? Who says so?" And Mrs. Granger took the bait. "Who says dog means dog? You do, Nicholas. You and I and everyone in this class, in this school, in this town, in this state, and in this country. We all agree. And if we lived in France, we would all agree that the right word for that hairy four-legged creature was a different word. Chien, which sounds like chien, but it means what DOG means to you and me. And in Germany, God, this is a cute little picture of all these cute little dogs. And in Germany, they say Hund, and so on, all around the globe. But if all of us in this room decided to call that creature something else, and if everyone else did too, then that's why it would be called, or that's what it would be called. And one day it would be written in the dictionary that way. We decide what goes in that book. And she pointed at the giant dictionary, and she looked right at Nick, and she smiled again. Then Mrs. Granger went on. But of course that dictionary was worked on by hundreds of very smart people for many years. So as far as we are concerned, that dictionary is the law. Laws can change, of course, but only if they need to. There may be new words that need to be made, but the ones in that book have been there for good reasons. Mrs. Granger took a look at the clock. 8 minutes left. Now then, for today, you were to have done the exercises beginning on page 12 in your Words Alive book. Please get out your papers. Sarah, will you read the first sentence, identify the mistake, and then tell us how you corrected it? Mrs. Granger jammed the whole day's work into the last 8 minutes. A blur of verbs and nouns and prepositions. And yes, there was another homework assignment. And Nick didn't try to sidetrack Mrs. G again. She had slowed her down a little, but had he stopped her? No way. She was unstoppable, at least for today. Woo! Nick does not sound like a very good kid. So real quick, let's add some stuff to our charts. I want to put something on Mrs. Granger that maybe you don't know what it means, but I'm going to tell you what it is anyway. And I think we want to add it for Nick and Mrs. Granger, but it is called cunning. That's what the word is. That means they're very, very quick. They know how to respond back and they want to get a rise out of people. They have very smart ways of thinking of things. They're creative. They're very sneaky and kind of sly and shifty. Like they just have a good way of coming about things. Very cunning. Now, I'm also thinking for Nick, I want to add, he's not a good student. I wouldn't say that a good student tries to trick their teacher all of the time, and a good student does not say things without raising their hand unless otherwise instructed by the teacher, or doesn't try to find loopholes in the teacher's lessons or try to get out of homework. He's doing a lot of things that don't show me he's a good student. Now, some themes in Frindle. I think I want to put one on here, and he might not have learned this lesson, but I think Mrs. Granger was trying to get him to learn the lesson. So I think Mrs. Granger, like I talked about earlier, was trying to get him to learn to be respectful. Was he respectful? No. But she wanted him to be respectful. Some other themes, we have a ton of different common themes that we could see. Another theme that I'm thinking that she was trying to get Nick to learn was responsibility. And I think she's trying to get the whole entire class to learn to be responsible. That's why she gives them homework and makes them do so much work from home. Those are the themes that I think that Mrs. Granger is trying to teach Nick in this chapter. Now, the author is probably teaching us something too. But we're not going to learn what the author's trying to teach us. He's probably trying to say be respectful, responsibility, but Nick didn't follow that. Nick isn't doing that. He's kind of being a little turkey, right? So we're not going to know any more themes for a while, but that's why we have this chart. We're going to continue to put them on here. I also think that Mrs. Granger is trying to teach him the value of language. I think also the author might be trying to say, hey, dictionaries and words and knowing your vocabulary is a very good life skill to have. The value of language, it's important to the value or the importance of language. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen. If I had to ask some questions, I'm wondering what's going to happen. Nick seems like he is developing another plan because he said like ... at least for today. So that makes me think that Nick has something else up his sleeve that he's going to pull on Mrs. Granger. Poor Mrs. Granger. All right, guys, tomorrow we will read chapter 6 and 7, and I cannot wait to read those to you. So show up, watch the video, enjoy. You're just going to answer some questions today down below over chapter 5. And you're also going to read for 30 minutes. All right, bye, guys.